Hello and welcome to Young Blossom 25 Future Leaders Revealed. I'm Inga and with me is Vias, my co-host. And today with us is Florian Schmitz. Florian is partner and global practice lead for consumer, FMCG and retail at Mercury Urval, specializing in executive search and leadership advisory. With nearly a decade at the firm, he boasts a 94% success rate. Florian, you can confirm that in a second. In headhunting, and holds an ICF-ACC certification as an executive coach as well. His expertise aligns perfectly with insights on generational leadership, trends in consumer goods. And Florian is also a podcast host himself, where you can maybe talk to us a little bit about that. In your podcast, you predominantly invite current leaders to share their journey of success, but also failures. Very interesting. I tuned in. More interestingly, Florian brings academic depth. He's holding a bachelor's degree in history and law from the Bielefeld University, a master's degree in European studies from KU Leuven, and a master's degree in modern history from the University of Bern. So that history, Florian, is very intriguing. This is what Perplexity had to say about you. So we use Perplexity AI to do the introduction, to tell us what's there to know about our guests. Florian, very, very warm welcome. And I hand over to you to fill in the gaps. What Perplexity never tells us is something personal, which our listeners always appreciate.
Yeah, of course, I can get that. And I hope there is much more to say about me. But I guess many things are also part of a different conversation. Maybe over the roofs of Athens with a glass of wine. That would be nice one day. I think we should try to meet up personally.
Agree.
Appreciate a lot for having me. Very interesting topic. Of course, Gen Z starts to pop up on our radars as they are entering mid-management. So especially when it comes to talent pipelines, internal assessments, then often enough for head of positions, we are asked to assess a person's personality and the fit to the task ahead. I think that is one finding already, that people enter now the mid-management already in their mid-late 20s, something when I started, when you started to work, that would have been quite unusual. And actually, I'm surprised, like the AI summary is there's not so much to add, but of course, when it comes to my private life, this is a bit more in the shadows. I do live in Dresden, in the eastern part of Germany, which always is a bit of a surprise because it is not one of the centers you usually think of when it comes to Germany and when it comes to consumer and retail. I have a family, so we have a little son, my wife, and we moved quite a bit around. We lived in Frankfurt, we lived in Karlsruhe, and now back in Dresden, which is a great place to live. Little flight connections makes it a bit harder at times. We spend a lot of time in the woods, outside, hiking, cooking as a family. Our son is 2.5 years old, so he's digging in, he's supporting us. And then I read a lot, being a historian by education. My father was a professor. I grew up with books, very important part of my life. My wife sometimes says I like to buy them. I would say I also like to read them, but I'm quicker in buying than in reading, I'd say. Maybe that's in a nutshell something.
Right. Well, fantastic. Lovely to have you on the show, Florian. And I think we found each other on LinkedIn, and I found that background of history. I read a couple of your essays because you're also publishing some essays on LinkedIn, and I found them quite intriguing. There was one about the younger generation and how they're entering now into workplace, and the context of it. I found it super, super interesting. So that's why how I reached out to you. So in today's episode, actually, because usually what we do is we talk a bit more about the preconceptions of the generation. But in today's episode, we actually want to do it slightly differently. And we want to focus a bit the conversation on reflecting on what we have learned from the future leaders episodes. And we gathered some learnings from that generation. And what we would like to do is to bounce it off with you and to reflect a bit on what we're hearing, what we're seeing, where's the gap, and how do we expect that to evolve, if that works with you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I also do like your approach of actually talking with Gen Z, not only talking about them. And I guess that is something that every generation, looking back in history, would have appreciated, because usually it's the older generation looking down the younger generation. And then it's interesting to see that from ancient Rome to today, the motives are more or less the same. So it's always about something that young people do not want to work anymore. It's like if you look back maybe 100 years, then it would have been much more about morals and ethics. So a decline and the younger generation would be quite vocal about finding their place in a society that then obviously always is in change and in transformation. Yeah. So I think when it comes to discussion, it's always interesting to look at who is talking, what are their motives, what are their interests, and then see what's behind the surface of what you can read about on LinkedIn and in respective newspapers.
So, Florian, a very warm welcome from my side as well. And I think you said a lot because we were reviewing the episodes, the 11 episodes we have already recorded with Inga, and we see a lot of contradictions coming out. Those we can group like in three main areas. One, Gen Z seems to be looking for stability. This is what they say, but we do see them changing jobs very, very frequently. The second thing is that they value autonomy. This is what we get as an insight from them, and remote working, but at the same time, they crave deeper connections. And third, they seem to be confident in their abilities, but at the same time, they feel so insecure about the future. What is your perspective on these contradictions? What are your first thoughts?
I now sound, I guess, much older than I'm actually in. I'm not Gen Z, I'm a Gen Y, born in 1988. But I think a lot of it has to do with the age and the situation where you are in life between your 20s and your 30s. Yeah. Because there's happening a lot. You're leaving school, you're leaving your parents' home, you're entering university, leaving university, have first job experiences, money becomes important. Maybe you find the love of your life, or the first important relationship breaks. You move into a different city. So there's just a lot of experience that you gain in between leaving school and your mid 30s. Just happening a lot, meaning you're looking for stability. The perception of what stability means is something different when you're 20 and when you're 30 and when you're 35. If you become a parent early in your mid 20s, then suddenly this whole perception that you had changes a lot. So I just as a first grasp of it. Then when it comes to value autonomy and craving deeper connections, this is just out of my pocket, but it can be related to maybe it mixes two different things. One is the workplace, where you start learning that your colleagues are not your friends. And that doesn't mean that you don't feel sympathy, that you don't like. I think it's so important that you like the people you're working with, because in the end, it's people working with people who are creating results and who perform in teams. So a level of sympathy helps a lot, but they are not your friends. And this is also something that you learn just by experience. And then craving deeper connection, this is like, correct me, yeah, and you have more experience in that field, but that can also be connected to social media. Yeah, so there's a lot of change on the one hand, and there's a lot of intimacy because you learn a lot about people on the social media. But there's always the mirror in between, so you don't really get to know people. And the same applies for the workplace. You spend a lot of time. I spend more time with my colleagues than I do spend with my wife, naturally, because 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a day, I'm not with my family. But still, there's a professional border between you and your client, you and your colleagues.
It's never a bad thing spending more time with your colleagues than with your wife,
First, spending time with my wife.
We know where you both stand on your marriages, probably. It's all clear.
At least now we do.
Florian, maybe I can relate to what you're saying, because our observations also, the younger our guests were, the more the contradictions were, which goes back to what you're saying, the kind of figuring out things, the same way we were figuring out. things when we were in our 20s, right? Like in your 20s, when you start working, you have maybe a different context and background, how you grew up versus if you were a Gen Y, Gen X, boomers, or Gen Z. But at the end of the day, everybody needs to figure it out in the context where they're being placed into. I think it's the how the figuring out is happening seems to be different. And one of the things, one other contradiction in a way is how does this generation deal with confrontation? And on the one hand, they're very comfortable communicating and expressing themselves. Let's not say communicate, expressing themselves. And they're going to give it to you in your face, like to the point where you feel uncomfortable. They're perfectly fine with that. However, if you do the same to them, my goodness, then there is a complete shutdown right away. And we had in one of the episodes, we were talking to somebody who is a coach, a career coach, and she was saying, "Oh yeah, you need to be careful. You need to be this." And I'm like, I have the feeling that I need to walk on eggshells, whereas I need to endure everything that they feel in the moment is going to come my way. So when there is confrontation, their response is not to face it. Their response is to escape it. What's your view on this? Any observations, any experience, any thoughts?
Clarity is always a bit tough on people. I know
Good
you
one.
listened in our last episode 8 at Top Shelf, when we spoke to the CEO of Fiskars, Steffen Hahn. And for me, he's one of the leaders amongst all C-level leaders I know who brings the highest level of clarity to the table towards others, but also to himself. I think this is really something you can learn from him, leading to my point of, I think one of really the strong suits, and I'm seeing that in those assessments when people enter head-off positions, is the level of clarity. What do I expect from my workplace? What do I need to achieve in my role, and so on. And then maybe when you switch sides and you direct clarity to somebody, again, who's at a rather early stage of his career, then they need to get used to it. And you mentioned one of the papers that I wrote about relational leadership. One of the biggest issue, and that is not then necessarily connected to the generation you're in, but one of the biggest issue that I do see in senior management is that usually you let things go as long as results are fine. And usually when you enter a conversation and when you bring, and I use quotation marks, clarity to the conversation, then when I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear here, but when your shit hits the fan. So when it's already too late, meaning there is no conversation and then suddenly you put everything on the table. And this is, if you, not to point fingers, Inga, but if you tell me like they are not used to clarity, then my question is like, when do they get clarity? And my hypothesis would be when I talk to senior leaders, then obviously not Gen Z. Most likely there has been no regular talk about what is going on. And then again, for Gen Z, it's maybe then the same. They also do need to learn this form of leadership because as all people, they just assume that things are in a certain way set and they underestimate the relational aspect in every relation.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. There was an episode with Simon Sinek and Esther Perel where they were talking about relationships in general. So why are relationships important for your mental health, your personal development, like so many things. Relationships are so important, and different type of relationships service different needs. And they just touch based on Gen Z. And Esther Perel, she alluded that the younger generation, and this is Gen Z, but even more is going to be Gen Alpha, so the kids right now, they don't learn conflict anymore. Why? Because where did we learn conflict? They all learn conflict on the playground, playing with other kids. A lot more time was spent in social interaction, real personal social interaction rather than social interaction on the screen. So the screen time, I mean, we didn't have any screen time really when we were kids. We were growing up on the playground, outside. And our parents were not around because we were actually allowed from a young age to be outside by ourselves. So ultimately, if I get into a fight with Florian, I'm going to fight it out with Florian. It's not going to be my helicopter mother, feedback to myself, and Florian's helicopter mother fighting it out for us, which even if today kids are spending time on the playground, their parents, I see you smiling a lot, so maybe there are some notes you're taking. So kids really don't learn conflict situation and to endure. So not so much to punch each other in the face, but to endure conflict and to face conflict and kind of work it out by themselves at a really young age, which is her hypothesis why the Generation Z is communicating the way they're communicating, because they haven't really learned it to communicate properly. Because rather young age, they are used to a lot more screen time. There is consumption, but there is no response needed. So does that resonate in terms of evolution a bit?
When I'm smiling, I always have like a critical comment in mind on that. Yeah. I was just, but seriously reflecting, I thought like, I don't have data on that. And it's always helpful, I think, if you talk about this, if you make a statement, to look at data present. And some things that I read point out similar findings, and I think there is a lot to it. I still believe that if you want to learn human interaction, then best is to do this face to face, yeah, in a physical meeting, not necessarily punching each other face, but meeting up and spending time together. On the other hand, of course, this might be a misperception of what it means to live or to spend time in the digital world. It's not alone time, but actually there is a lot of fast, speedy interaction connected with a lot of clarity. That's one thing. And then, this is something that always makes me smile when the older generation is talking about the younger generation. It's like, how did you raise your kids? We as parents, I think if we just are honest with ourselves, reflecting objectively, then we always do have the impulse. And I think it's beautiful that we want to help our kids, make them feel safe, move out problems in their way. The other hard truth is you will learn conflict one way or another, because look at the world. There is so much micro conflict, bigger conflict, when people spend time together. And then it leads a bit to my point of the responsibility of organizations, is then to create a culture. And for example, one of the cultures in my field of work where you really can learn communication, all directions, I think it is mass, where you bring a lot of clarity to the table, where you bring a lot of critical self-reflection, blaming anybody, but always forward-leaning is like, how can I improve? How can we improve? How can we make sure that we bring the best and the highest possible performance to the table? So then it's maybe not necessarily about learning conflict, but again, to your point, Inga, from earlier, bringing clarity and continuity into a relationship, into a conversation.
Can we just follow up on that? As you mentioned Mars, I heard also I listened to a podcast about the Mars company or the Mars history, which is a bit of a red thread along how the culture of the company operates from back then all the way until today. Very, very inspirational and aspirational. Do you have other companies, not putting you on the spot, where you see they're doing a particularly good job in being ready for that younger generation? No other way to put it, but you know what I mean. Like, who's doing a good job from the big corporates?
Yeah. In general, I would say to all of our clients, from small, medium-sized, owner-led, privately led companies somewhere in the middle of Germany to large corporates. Most of them are thinking about the younger generations. And that I'd say this is Gen Y. It is Gen to a lesser extent because we're getting older, and Gen Z and then Gen Alpha. Also because due to the demographic factor, there are just not so many. I saw a study that at the moment the demographic factor slows down as more and more jobs are being cut. So it's balancing out. So I think a German professor a recent study. So first thing, everybody thinking about it. There are sometimes specific programs designed to meet specific needs of Gen Z or younger generations, where I'm a bit skeptical, not sure if this is really helpful. Again, more, I would say, who's doing a particularly good job are all companies who invest a lot in their culture. And then when I talk about culture, then I usually mean a transparent, open culture where it is very clear that we are inclusive and we are a performance-driven organization. And what I always name as example is Barilla, for example, as a case, who have always been a people-oriented company, but in the last 10 years, they made sure to create a culture. I think it's a great case to be inclusive on the one hand and be highly performant. You can look a lot on Swedish organizations, which I think has an interesting culture in that regards. Spotify, IKEA. Just when you look at it and if you read up on, there's a lot published about them. Yeah. And then also, I mean, P&G, Unilever, and there again, no culture, no company is perfect. But if you're looking for best practices, just look at those companies and pick and copy what helps your organization's specific needs.
When we talked to Irais in our first episode, when we kicked off Young Blossom 20, she made quite, a bold statement saying that it's not Gen Z that has the issue due to their, big demands. We always believe that this generation is very, very demanding. It's the fact that we have and we live in a world where leadership is totally outdated. I was always thinking that Gen Z is demanding because we tend to live in a world that is very, very fast evolving. I can still recall like Inga when she was talking in our town halls in PepsiCo Greece here, saying that 5 years ago we had COVID, then a war came to our doorstep. Now we have a guy entering another country, taking their leader, fly them out to New York and having a trial. And I don't know what else is coming upon us. So this creates a lot of instability, a lot of insecurity. And this I connected personally always with the fact that those people need more now because they don't know what is going to happen later in the future. What do you think? What's your take on this?
Yeah, you see me smiling this time because I'm absolutely aligned with the statement. And actually, I started when we met Inga, and I listened in. Obviously, I started with the first episode, and it really got me thinking. And that there is a lot of truth to this statement, and leads a bit. I mentioned the question like, who is talking and why? And then, of course, you have Gen Z being vocal and having the channels to be heard. Yeah, because they are digital savvy. Yeah, that's their home turf. But who is really loud in the debate? Who has the broadest audience? It's not Gen Z. It is us who are in power at the moment. And then I'd say the debate about Gen Z largely emerges because established systems, and that might be HR, that might be leadership, that also is our performance logic. So how do the three of us, how does the German chancellor defines performance? We are being challenged and we do not have a consistent answer. And really or a very common and understandable reaction to being challenged is like, to go on the defense, not to start reflecting yourself. What can we do differently? What you said there in the reality set is the first generation, and you can always already find that within Gen Y. Gen Z really refuses to compensate for structural dysfunctions with personal sacrifice. So when I don't know, we had a leadership issue and organizational issue, then I have been always ready, because this is also how I was raised. And this is the examples that I had. I always was ready just to compensate for it with personal sacrifice. I just would work longer and harder. And I still think hard work and success, there's a correlation. Yeah. And you might not rise to the top if you're not willing to put in more effort than everybody else. It's also a historical truth, maybe. But still, Gen Z is naming that. And there, I think what looks like maybe for us might look and sound like entitlement, and maybe it is just transparency. If somebody appears weak to us, fragile, then maybe this is a person who is just very good in setting boundaries, and we are not. And then maybe, of course, as an organization, you can fingers and blame lazy Gen Z for frequently moving jobs and leaving an organization. But it also could be, I'm not saying this is the entire truth, yeah, but also can be just a rational response to systems that don't offer enough responsibility without agency, not enough purpose without a consequence, and then also maybe performance demands without true and real leadership capacity. So in many aspects, then Gen Z, in my view, is not necessarily challenging work just for the sake of it or because they're lazy or whatsoever, but they're just also challenging and naming badly designed work. And they're not rejecting leadership, but rejecting unearned authority. And then we could switch sides. And then also, as I said, like if you really want to earn a lot of money, if you want to have a lot of responsibility, you need to put in the work. Yeah. But maybe it's not staying in the office very late or, all the cliches.
Yeah. And I'm trying to reflect on what you're saying because this is a great insight. Reflecting on all of the episodes we did, I think one thing came very, very clearly out. It's the fact that Gen Z is working to live rather than living to work. So they always see the workplace in a way that's more transactional. They're not there to build the relationships, to build loyalty. They're here as long as it lasts, and then we move on. One question is always, first of all, if you agree, what do you believe is driving this kind of behavior of Gen Zers?
Yeah, absolutely agreeing. I think I would say it is a form of risk management, actually. Yeah. Not putting all apples in one basket, I think it's the saying. Like, I do over-identify a bit with work. And that has highly positive implications for myself, for my clients, for my company. Also does have its downsides. But then if you identify or if you separate and if you're a bit more clear about what is my identity, and then you say like, there is work and work is important to me. And I think in general, this applies to, there's a study, but for most people work is an important part of their identity, but it is not sacred. It's not some holy thing that can't be touched. Yeah. Then maybe it also leads to your question of like switching jobs. Yeah. Then loyalty is conditional. It's not emotional. Loyalty is something you have to earn as a leader and as an organization. I think this is an important point to remember. And we will always, nobody, no organization, no person will always live up to this very high standard. But in general, we need to work for this. Again, a relational component. And then you have an identity that is more diverse. Gen Z might have a full-time job and then switch to 80% because they're starting an education that has nothing to do with their work, maybe an art education or a charity project or a side business. So many people, I don't have data, but my impression is that there are more younger people who have a side business going on, and they are actually learning money, and they're making experiences that helps them boosting their career record because they diversify their background in sense of a creator economy. So maybe really about risk management, I'd say.
Yeah, I really like how you put it as a risk management element, because I think our expectation to loyalty is not appropriate. It's simply not appropriate anymore. I can relate to it, and it's a little bit to what you said in your previous statement. How I came up with the idea talking to Gen Z rather than about the Gen Z is because we had people resigning, and then you see the pattern that it's always young people resigning. And then I went to Vios, who was my recruiter back then, and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Look, people don't progress fast enough." I'm like, "What do you mean they don't progress fast enough?" You go immediately into this, what are they expecting? And then you start digging a little bit. So I started doing actually exit interviews myself as a, CEO of an organization. I'm doing exit interviews with a 25-year-old to understand, because they will actually tell you.
What did you find out? Yeah.
So what it was essentially is that they didn't feel that they're progressing fast enough. They didn't have the clarity how they can really progress. And those are the two biggest things. It was never about the money. And I think for any generation, it is rarely about the money. The money is just an outcome of many things that happen along the way. And for them, it was lack of development. I feel like I'm ready. I'm not being presented with the right opportunity, and somebody else is giving me the opportunity, number one. Or, well, I don't even know how I can develop here. So you know what? I'm going to take my chances because I can.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there and you're like, right, I don't have an answer. Like, I don't have the right response to that because I think it's fair. I think it's bloody fair. And the difference is that we were enduring it. And you said it. We were enduring it. We were okay with that. And somebody would say, yeah, Florian, just hold on tight and trust the system. The other thing that comes in where I think where loyalty got a massive crack is the last 5 years. I think with COVID, we had this mega hype of some businesses performed exceptionally well because of the pandemic, and some business performed not so well. But the aftermath of pandemic resulted into, I think we called it restructuring back then. Now we're calling it transformation to give it a positive spin. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is we are not able to grow our businesses. And as a result, we need to manage cost a lot more drastically. I mean, that's what it is. And on top of that, you have the AI kind of thing that we try all to figure out, and we don't know exactly how. So we keep on transforming, and that transformation results into job cuts, very bluntly, job cuts. And the parents, if it's not the Gen Z themselves, but it's their parents who spend 20 years in the company, are being made redundant in an instant with, the right, the wrong reasons, whatever you want to put an emotional label to it. So you put all of that into the luggage, and then am I still surprised that they are not willing to give me their loyalty and be patient and wait for me to come up with the right opportunity at the right time when I believe they're ready? So that's one element. And the other element is how we train them. And that came a lot in all the episodes that where the Gen Zs came in, and they said, look, there is a lot of emphasis put on the hard skills, how to do the job. I really don't need that. There are so many tools. There's so many ways for us to figure it out. Like, we're very equipped to do that. And they're a lot faster. And if you think about it, when I started my job, was barely internet available. So you were reliant. It sounds like I'm 100 years old. I'm only 47, just for the record. But I started at 23.
Makes a difference, yeah?
The only source to learn were the people who were doing the job already. So you were dependent on the people and them sharing the information. And some people were really nice and were sharing. Some people were not so nice and were not sharing. Today, that dependency does not exist. If they are resourceful and they're smart cookies, they're going to figure it out in no time. So, but where they need a lot more guidance, and this is like a massive ask from all of them when we say, what is the one thing you would like to learn? Is like, be better prepared to be a leader, be better prepared to be a manager, because they're also sliding into that management with, okay, you're trying to teach me how to be, the brand manager. I can figure it out. What I cannot figure out necessarily all by myself is how to lead people. And I think in that way, it's very similar to what we also had or didn't have. But we needed, or the manager of us needed to balance a lot more between functional expertise building, because it was not accessible in the same way it is today, and leadership expertise, management expertise, versus what it is today. So actually, we can dedicate a lot more time in making them better managers and transitioning into leaders, because we don't actually need to spend as much time in telling them how to do the job. I mean, a lot less. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, maybe not development not necessarily is always connected to leadership. Yeah, but development is always connected to growth. There again,
100%.
there you have data. You can look at the data and what are the studies telling us, that it doesn't matter if you are 18, 25, 35, 55. What are people looking for? They look for development, and development is not necessarily hierarchical, but it means personal growth. And personal growth means I learned something in 2026 that I was not able to do in 2025, or it costs me a lot of capacity and resources. I really, again, I was smiling. This discussion on like, I'm ready to make the next step, and my manager, my leader, my organization, they don't let me. And this is very typical, and the discussion gets even, I think then it's, for me personally, it is not a Gen Z discussion, but it's something that I have in the past decade always been meeting when it came to the step from senior management, like from senior director into VP, SVP, and then maybe C-level. Like everybody, when you made it so far, usually there is an element of self-confidence and self-perception. So I'm the one who is able to move things forward, dependent on my abilities. And they're like, I am ready. And if you then talk to their leaders, they're like, not ready. This. And then our question is like always the same. Did you have the conversation? Does she know? Does he know? And then like, yeah, we had review meetings. Yes, I told him. And again, not pointing fingers. I'm also like, I can point at myself, like, but you need to have the conversation. Where are you in your development? What do you need to develop to make the next step? And this is what I will support you with as your leader. Maybe also ask a question. What does she or he needs? Yeah. This is what we can do as an organization, pay for coaching. We already invested in the assessment. Please appreciate that as well. It's expensive, but this is what I need to see from you in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months, in the next board meeting, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. And then, of course, this conversation can make a turn to the left. Usually it takes a turn in the other direction, that somebody appreciates that, again, clarity, and will start working towards a direction, because suddenly there is a direction and there is also a goal. And then again, as an organization, be honest, and everybody will know there is a set of director positions. There is a smaller set of senior director positions. There's an even smaller set of VP positions. And usually there's only one CEO. So most likely you will not make it, but you can work into this direction, and the organization also can make you ready to take the step somewhere else. And again, this is, I think Gen Z is more equipped to point that out, and that hurts a lot.
Yeah. I 100% agree. What is the positive spin of it? They don't necessarily think in levels. They really think in learning. I mean, some will also think in levels, but ultimately, what they are really adamant about is learning. So for them, growth equals learning. I cannot be doing the same thing that I believe I'm doing well unless somebody tells me otherwise. I will debate it really hard. Maybe somebody might convince me that I'm not doing as great, but it's the constant learning is what drives and motivates them. And at least they all claim it's not about the next promotion, the next level, whatever the companies they've been working in. It's more about the learning and absolutely the transparency of what is possible and what is not possible. And I think for any generation, I was lucky enough that my managers were always transparent in what's possible and what's not possible, be it by structure, because as you say, I mean, there are so many positions as you start growing, right? It becomes less and less positions the more senior you become. But they were also creative and they were always highlighting how likely or unlikely the creativity may result into a promotion in a side step, which is fantastic. And I think that transparency is what they want and what they demand. Not only what they want, but what they demand. And I think that is very different. They will not endure for as long as we were and trusting the system and, fingers crossed. But learning is a big, big element. At the same time, when talking about learning, I'm shifting gears a little bit. So one of the things that they're wishing for is that our generation is more open to learning, which for us was a bit of a what? I consider myself very open to learning, but I'm realizing that there are maybe biases where I am, no, that I know, or that I'm not interested, or that whatever. So where it
And there's always the self-perception and there's an outside perspective you need to consider.
So we asked in some of the episodes, so what is it that we can learn from you? Not as sarcastic as it sounds right now, but we genuinely asked the question. So what do you want us to learn from you? And they said digital fluency. And I find digital fluency is such a big, what does that even mean? And they say, okay, so you say we're on the phone all the time. Well, do you have data that you're on the phone less? So I actually went and I'm like, because every Monday my phone tells me how many hours I spent on my screen. Turns out we're spending pretty much the same amount of time on our screen as any generation.
Which is
maybe
not a good
bit
thing.
more than Gen Alpha, right? Because we are on our screen all the time. But what we are consuming is very different, obviously. The three of us, very different to Adriana, who was on the show the last episode. And they're all asking to be open to learn, well, how do you consume that amount of content? And what do you do with that content? Have you ever asked? Have you ever been curious to understand why we are watching what we're watching? And I have to say, no, I didn't bother. I didn't bother. You think we are consuming because, sometimes we want to take our head off. Yeah, but so do you, whatever you consume the light content. But that's not always the case. It's a big assumption we're making that, they're just scrolling. Well, how do you think I'm able to talk about trends? Like I had a girl in an interview for a marketing position, and she was extremely well prepared, extremely well-rounded to talk about brands, not only PepsiCo brands, but adjacent brands, category, beyond category, how consumers behave. And I'm like, where are you coming from? Obviously, Bios had an answer for that. He found her. But extremely versatile. How does she know all of that? Because I actually went after the interview, we hired her. And I said, so how did you know all of that? Like, how did you prepare for the interview?
Yeah.
It's like, I was just scrolling.
Yeah.
I'm like,
well, I think this is like more or less the answer to the question in the room. And still we're talking about the workplace, career, and then we will talk about results. And then I think digital savvy means how does what you do pay into achieving the results and boosting your performance. What else you're doing might not be that relevant when it's just about reaching a specific goal. And in this case, it goes hand in hand. In another case, it might not, and then you might need to adjust. Often a question is about what makes people successful. And that's an interesting effect of our podcast. Usually this question, what makes me successful, I get asked by the people I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And that is C-level, C-1 and 2. With the podcast, we have a lot of young people reaching out, early 20s till late 30s. I'd say. The answer I'd give is look at what you are doing, look at what you want to achieve, and ask yourself and be really honest about it. How does this pay into what I want to achieve. And then being digital savvy might mean everything, or it might mean nothing at all. And you can learn this.
I think curiosity from both sides. And I do sense that we're asking the younger generation being a lot more curious. Now you can argue they have a lot more to learn. But in the times like these times where there are so many things evolving so fast and rapidly, I think we can dial up our curiosity quite a bit as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the biggest question organizations have at the moment is how can we an inclusive workplace to be a highly performant organization? And that inclusive means gender, means age, means where do people come from geographically, culturally, social, I think is highly underestimated. And how we can take all their experiences in order to create a culture that moves forward. And then you need to be curious. You need to have that, you asking the right questions, asking, being open, being transparent, and again, being clear about what you can expect from your employees and from the organization.
I agree. When you were talking about the other companies, I think there are a couple of companies that I came across. That's not an exhaustive research, but I came across where they're making a very conscious step towards integrating the younger generation, future leader, Gen Z, Gen Y perspective into their strategy, vision. One of them is Hugo Boss. So they actually appointed a 26-year-old Gen Z into the board. She's actually representing, so they're trying to have representatives from that group of people in key positions where decisions about directions of the company are being made. Veleda is another one. They are quite vocal about it. And Louis Vuitton is another company.
I didn't know that.
Very, very consciously, not only on the craftsmanship side, but also on the leadership side, integrating the younger generation into strategy. And that for me is very different to companies like PepsiCo, where it's still very, Gen X and older generation who are still in power. And you can feel that dynamic. And I can say that because I've worked in peers. There is an acknowledgement, but it doesn't go beyond that. And then it remains an individual leader approach, right? So I believe we need to do something. So that creates then culture, I guess, at the end of the day. If enough people follow the same approach, it will eventually elevate and be integrated and will dissolve in the culture.
In my view, those examples you gave and the action those companies took are very aligned with the findings of the research on diversity, stating that diverse teams, inclusive teams, not diverse teams, but inclusive teams. So teams where you have this sense of psychological safety, meaning I can voice my opinion without being in fear of a negative impact, that they are more performant than non-inclusive teams or homogeneous teams. Yeah. And when and this especially applies to our field, to FMCG, to retail. What makes a CPG, FMCG company successful? Yeah. It's total consumer dedication. And you need to know what the shopper wants today, tomorrow, and the day after. And you need to have your innovation pipeline ready. And then, of course, you need to look at the data. And there's a lot of data. You just need to buy it and work with it. But then there is also an emotional component talking about brands. Yeah. Brands are not only successful because they look at the data, come to the right conclusions, and then move on with it and bring it to the market. This is maybe 80%. True success often enough comes with this personal or like this personal spin with a highly emotional catch then. And this most likely, and this is also not like usually not a form of one person being a genius, but it's a team effort.
Yes.
And most likely of an inclusive team.
Agree.
Good.
Yeah. All right. Vius, how are we doing?
We're doing great. I think it's gonna be an awesome episode.
Very nice. I had so I always keep notes very traditionally on my paper before the platform is going to summarize it for me through AI.
Same here,
But I
but
think
I'm usually actually I'm using a Remarkable, so at least it's a digital
it's
notepad.
digital. Yeah, that's true. I'm like literally on paper with a pencil.
Wow.
I know.
As a historian, I do appreciate.
See. Thank you so much for your reflection and for your perspective. I think it was very valuable from your background and context and who you're working with to validate some of the observations that we have. Because given the sample size, we're still in observation mode. We cannot say it's empirical viable just yet. But there were some really good things I took out that. Gen Z refuses to compensate for organizational dysfunction with personal sacrifice. Love the quote is going to end up in my 5-9 pages, whatever it's going to be. Work to live as a form of risk management, I think related to loyalty, that I liked it a lot. There needs to be a culture to learn communication. I think that's also quite rich in what companies where they need to make an effort to foster communication and to give space for that communication as well, and to course correct a little bit left and right in the right way without walking on eggshells. I would like to transition us into the lightning round, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, heard about it.
Don't overthink it. Just throw it at me right away. Your favorite chat channel? Like, how do you chat with people?
WhatsApp. It's WhatsApp. Yeah.
Social media you spend most time on?
I only have LinkedIn. The rest I deleted for protection of my personal time and space.
The music you get from?
Spotify. And my age is 21. Spotify told me. Not sure if that's a good or a bad thing.
I get the idea of music you're listening to. Podcasts you get from?
Also Spotify. And a lot of inspiration on LinkedIn for that and of my network.
Audiobooks or physical books?
Always physical books.
Kind of sense the answer based on the comments you were making earlier. What is the one skill you would recommend Gen Z to learn?
Strategic communication. I think that's the most important thing you need to learn if you want to make a career or if you want to be successful in what you're doing. You need to know what to tell whom in what manner at what time.
Brilliant. What is the one skill you would our generation recommend to learn?
Clarity. Getting rid as much as possible of all the bias that you just have based on your experience, based on your development and your upbringing. Yeah, it helps a lot. It's tough, not perfect at it, but try to be reflective on what your context is, especially as a leader with a lot of responsibility.
What is your favorite podcast? And you cannot say this one
Top
or
Shelf.
your own. You cannot go your own.
I do listen to a lot of podcasts, but I do not necessarily follow them. I would say online marketing. So OMR, online marketing rock stars is the one that I do follow for professional purposes. My most favorite podcast of all times, I would say, is Alles Gesagt by a German newspaper. Of that site, where they basically talk to celebrities, authors, writers, movie actors, until everything is said. Like when this person, the guest has the feeling that's it.
Everything.
They have a safe word, yeah, and then the podcast ends without any outro whatsoever. It just stops in this second. It's amazing.
Check it out.
Nice.
Yeah, you need to, and you bring some time with it because some episodes are hours. Yeah, hours.
A famous person you would like to meet?
I don't have that.
Better.
Thank you.
Very good. So everything is set. Yeah.
That.
Bye. No, seriously. Thank you for having me. And of course, like when we met, I started thinking about more structured and systematic about the topic. And what I noticed today in the conversation, that this reflection is not stopping. Also, the discussion is, and I like the spirit of this conversation and the spirit of your podcast a lot.
Thank you. We're
It
good
was
people.
lovely
We're
having
nice
you.
people.
Absolutely. That's also something I learned over the past weeks, especially Vios.
Great. Thank you. So it was amazing having you. Thank you so much, Florian. For the people who are out there, just hit the follow, subscribe button so as not to lose any of our episodes. Until next time, see you.
See
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.